Howdy, I'm Allie. Welcome to aka Spooky Spiels, a hopefully short series of videos where I talk about a story idea I've had since like 2008, 2009, sometime around then. It's an urban fantasy world full of vampires, dragons, fairies, and more, and I figured there was no better time to talk about it than Halloween. So, for some background, essentially this world started as setting up for a single character, only to end up growing over the years with its own rules, influences, and new kind of supernatural creatures. In this world, they're called monsters. The story itself focuses around three characters: Kat, Daniel, and April, who all have their own uniqueness, let's say. They try to hide it, but hijinks happen and it's revealed, oh no, they all happen to be monsters. And through that, they end up bonding and learning to be close to one another and stop the end of the world. Anyways, I wanted to talk about it and just kind of, give some ideas, put it out there and get it out of my head so I can actually, put something out into the world. So I hope you don't mind, but I am just making a speed paint, making some videos, talking about my stuff. I am going to try and organize these videos so each focuses on one of the three main characters. This video specifically will focus on Kat, or what I like to call Dragon Tethers. So without making you wait any longer, let me show you Kat and Cosmo. Since this is the first video, I'm gonna give a little context about the setting and world as a whole before I actually get into the speed paint itself and talk about the characters. This Earth and its history largely resembles our own. This story actually takes place on the west coast of America, in the small college town of Irene, Oregon. The stories and mythology of the world largely remain the same as ours, but they aren't always accurate to the actual supernatural creatures within it. This is because monsters are actually a minority in this world, and a lot of their history was lost due to fear-mongering. But in recent years, so-called monsters have been fighting for equality. The rediscovery of monsters happened only 100 years ago, and some people today still don't know that monsters exist. Things are improving, but there's still some pushback from some unsavory groups. So, what is a Dragon Tether? Well, it's a monstrous condition. Basically, it means that Kat, main character here, has a connection to a dragon. One that cannot easily be undone. She was chosen by Cosmo, the apple dragon, to be his tether. Dragon Tethers represent their dragons in the material world and channel their power. So that's what the Tethers get out of that, but what about the dragons? Well, dragons don't really exist in this world. Let me explain. They're not imaginary, but they're beings made of pure magic. They don't really have atoms or a stable physical form that can be pulled into the material realm, and they cannot exist unaided in that realm. To exist there, they need to have somebody to channel their power through. Only then can they have a physical form in the material realm. There are a lot of benefits for a dragon to be in the material realm. It can expand its territory and domain, gain influence, favors, worship, or, just simply live, go day to day, explore a new place. There's a lot of reasons to be here. But to be able to access that, they have to give up a lot of their power to their tether, whoever they have a connection through, whoever's channeling them into the material world. That tether may then use that power unwisely, so it's always a risk, and a dragon should always choose their tethers carefully. Once this connection is struck, there's no going back. Sure, a person can change dragons for the rest of their life, but they will always be a tether, and they cannot return to what they once were. It is a permanent change that marks them forever, and it is not something that can be undone. I want to talk more about other dragons later, but first, let's get into Kat and Cosmo. So, for this story, originally Kat was meant to be a human with nothing supernatural about her. She's meant to be the main character of this story in this weird version of the story where All the supernatural elements were like metaphors for mental illness. I decided to scrap that idea entirely. And I also decided with it to kind of scrap who she was. She was meant to be the main character, but honestly, she was kind of boring. The only reason she was the main character was to have the audience have a POV/self-insert character. And as time grew on and I grew better as a storyteller and somebody just in general consuming media, I grew less and less in love with that idea. Don't get me wrong, it's great for exposition, but you can do other things with exposition without necessarily having to do that. I didn't like Kat as she was, so I did a huge rework of her. I took the elements I liked about her and scrapped the rest. I really liked her design. I think the long braided red hair is very striking. I really liked her body shape and build, and some of her story beats. But I decided to scrap everything else I had made and only work with what I liked. I approached it from a new angle, and eventually, with the help of my sibling, I ended up giving her a classic Americana aesthetic. Cause, she's as American as apple pie. In this version of the story, Kat is now a 22-year-old human who's moved to Irene, Oregon to go to college. She plays baseball for her college's team, she dreams of owning a 1958 Harley Duo, and she's desperate for a new start. Kat's been to other colleges in the past, but eventually got kicked out of each one, partially due to a friendly dragon. Kat isn't perfect, and her relationship with Cosmo at the start of the story is rocky. She resents him a bit for the whole college thing. I imagine, if this were an actual story, you'd get a flashback of what happened there. Or even, some starting exposition of her getting kicked out of her previous college because of Cosmo. Cosmo didn't mean to, of course. He's just a friendly little guy. But she ended up getting kicked out anyways, and yeah, she kind of resents him for that. She even laments that she got an uncool dragon to come. Apples? What kind of magic could you do with apples? She just wants to be normal for once and hopes her embarrassment with Cosmo don't keep repeating and mess up her new chance. As you can imagine, things don't go as planned. Thankfully, though, she ends up with two people who don't mind. Daniel and April, her new housemates, are supernatural themselves. As long as Cosmo doesn't overrun the house with plants, they're happy to have him around. For the first time since becoming a Tether, Kat has shown acceptance. Instead of getting yelps when Cosmo poofs into existence, she gets laughter from Daniel. Instead of Cosmo being shooed away and brushed aside, April bakes him little apple crumbles. She's given the space she needs, and when she needs to let out a little magic, she converts the garage into a makeshift band practice room and a greenhouse. This acceptance allows her to gain some self-confidence, and also changes her outlook on Cosmo a bit. It allows her to let go of the resentment she held towards him finally, and they're able to grow a little closer and work together better. Still, Kat has a bit to go, and can take advantage of Cosmo's goodwill at times, mostly for humor's sake though. She can be a bit ungrateful towards him and doesn't really know his history. She takes him for granted. This hurts him a bit, but he's sure they can work through it. He's not gonna give up on her. She's his tether, and he wouldn't pick anybody else, and he's sure it won't turn into anything bad. Eventually, they meet somebody who knows Cosmo and is offended by Kat's behavior on Cosmo's behalf. Another Tether, who I'll get to him soon, don't worry. For now though, let's actually move on to the Apple Dragon himself. The biggest question you're probably asking is, why is Cosmo, an apple dragon, living on the west coast of America, designed like an Asian dragon? And Yeah, fair question. I do have my reasons, though. I did some research, probably more than was necessary, and I found a whole buttload of information about apples that I ended up shoving into Cosmo. Apologies before we start. I am going to butcher this name. I'm so sorry. Please let me know how it's pronounced, but I'm doing my best here. Because apples, as we know, originally came from Kazakhstan in Asia. Now, originally I figured they probably followed the Silk Road trade route to China, and I looked up a map of where apples grew in Kazakhstan versus where like the Silk Road was, and the areas where those trees grew overlapped with the road. But as I found out, the research says the apples actually went through Russia before arriving in Europe. Again, I could be wrong on this. This was all just from Google, what I could find online. But I thought it was like a pretty cool idea. Eventually, they were shipped to America and spread by nurserymen like Johnny Appleseed. While I was researching this, I also found out that Kazakhstan had a folktale legend of Alderkoz. Again, I'm so sorry, I'm butchering these names. A trickster who apparently took from the rich and gave to the poor. Again, this is all just from Googling, but it did kind of put me in mind of Robin Hood. And it would also make sense for somebody like Johnny Appleseed to have been a tether to Cosmo in the past. Maybe even Alderkoz or Robin Hood as well. And that idea kind of informed a lot of Cosmo's character and his motivations. He's a dragon who wants to do good in the world. He chooses his tethers carefully, and those tethers go on to help those in need. The tethers he picks are remembered and revered. Cosmo's the type of dragon to see the potential in others and want to bring it out. He's not a bragger though, so Kat has to learn about this history after she's already been a bit of a dick to him. She's humiliated and humbled all at once, and she realizes she owes Cosmo more than an apology. Eventually, she's able to reconcile with Cosmo and regain his trust. She recognizes she has so much to grow, and vows to change for the better. Cosmo, of course, forgives her, and suggests maybe she could learn from the person who told her off. Speaking of which, let's get on to him now. So, confession, this character doesn't actually have a name. I still need to do more research first, because he's an Indigenous American, and I don't want to stereotype or just straight up ignore that. If you have any suggestions, put them in the comments for sure. But for now though, I'll just call him Mentor because that's the role he plays in this story. He becomes Kat's mentor. Mentor's changed a lot since his conception. Though he still doesn't have a name, he does have a character, and I've had this idea for his character for a while. He's a biker who travels across the US and rarely stays in one place for long. He can seem distant at first, but there's a heart in there that will help out those in need. I can imagine him stopping in a small town, and if a fight's going on, he goes in and he helps break it up or gets them away. Mentor, like his title suggests, is wise and experienced with a bit of a sense of humor, but he doesn't tolerate disrespect or abusive behavior. Despite making friends all over the country, he never rides with any of them and is very much like a lone wolf kind of character. At first, this seems to be from just because, oh, he's distant and bad boy, but there is actually some reasons for it. Mentor is the tether for the moon dragon, this huge bird-like dragon that's kind of a mix between a phoenix, an owl, an eagle, and, maybe some not bird parts as well. She's kind and motherly, she wants the best for her tether, but also she mourns that her presence only brings him danger. This isn't her fault, though. This is because her kind of brother, the sun dragon, wants her dead. They aren't really related because they aren't biological creatures, but that was their relationship at one point. The sun dragon's nothing like his sister, and you might have guessed, but there's some bad blood between them. Moon Dragon has previously lost Tethers to the Sun Dragon, and she wouldn't have chosen Mentor if she had any other choice. I think their story probably goes something like this. When he was young, Mentor had a fascination with the moon. He was caught in its thrall like the tides were. Moon Dragon took notice of him, watching but never touching, never getting close. She knew her brother was after her. Her brother wanted her dead. But she had already lost at least one tether beforehand. She didn't want to hurt him too. It was only in his teen years, where Mentor was going to die, that she finally opened up a connection to him and he became her tethered. It was after that that Mentor had to flee and keep on the run to hide from the watching eyes of the Sun Dragon. He only rides at night, dusk, and dawn, sleeping during the day. Kind of like a vampire, or at least vampire stories. Vampires in this world are very much real, but they're a little different than what you would expect. Mentor has forgiven his dragon for what she had to do, though she still wishes she could give him a better life. The two have a very close bond, which translates to better control and connection. When Mentor meets Cat, he sees somebody who needs to learn that respect for her dragon, as scolds her for her previous behavior. He met Cosmo's previous tether and had a lot of respect for the little dragon. When she humbles herself and apologizes to Cosmo, he's satisfied and agrees to be her mentor for Cosmo's magic. He will teach her what it is to be a dragon tether, what exactly it means, and how much responsibility is placed on her shoulders. Of course, he can't be there all the time. He does have to still be on the run, but he does stop by Irene, Oregon more often than not. However, doing that costs him. At some point during training with Cat, the Sun Dragon finally catches up with him. You'd think the Sun Dragon would kill him, but no. He's taken, not killed, and Cat is left in the dust, devastated. I don't want to spoil too much, so I won't go into a lot of detail about the climax and how it all works out. But I will talk to you about the Sun Dragon because, as you might have guessed, he's the villain of Cat's story. And in many ways, he's supposed to mirror her. Where Cat learns humility in her story and grace, the Sun Dragon is a raging narcissist. I mean, makes sense. The sun has always been there as long as humans have, even longer. It is one of the most constant objects of worship in mythology. It's been worshipped as a god, as a force beyond nature, giver of life and death. This definitely gave the Sun Dragon quite an ego boost and a bit of a god complex. And, once upon a time, it wasn't so bad. Once he called the Moon Dragon his sister, and they were worshipped as equals. Once he chose tethers that would become pharaohs and would be mistaken for gods, but nowadays his worship has thinned. Maybe in part due to Christianity or, destruction of supernatural stuff. And he turns that anger and frustration onto the other dragons. It's not just the Moon Dragon he wants dead. He wants to be the only dragon in the world. He wants the worshipped he once held. He wants the power he once wielded. The world at his feet, metaphorically speaking. Even if people are using him to get what they want. And there are some people using him to get what they want. There is a group of, quote, monster hunters who would prefer not to have any monsters around, including any dragons. I never said the Sun Dragon was smart. But the Sun Dragon's tether is almost second thought to that, to the thought of him. This is a person. He had a life once, but the Sun Dragon doesn't give him any agency. It's the abusive and controlling dynamic a tether relationship could fall into. Whereas both Mentor and Cat are partners or equals with their dragon, the Sun Dragon manipulates, threatens, and forcefully possesses his tether. And here's the thing, Cat could have ended up like the Sun Dragon, in some ways. If she decided to use Cosmo as nothing more than a power-up, if she manipulated his good heart into doing what she wanted, if she hadn't learned humility, their relationship could have turned abusive. It's a dark reflection in some ways. When I make unredeemable villains, I like them to have thematic connections to the hero. Here, that is the difference between having self-value, like Cat learns, and only valuing yourself, like the Sun Dragon. How that affects people and why it matters in the end, that's the point of this, and it is what drew me to this new concept and new story idea, rather than her old one. It's why I changed it, and I really do like this idea. I think that wraps things up for now. I've got a few pictures on screen. These are the finished character refs. I will be doing personal refs based off the colors, especially basically getting rid of all the backgrounds and shading and stuff. But for now, this is what they look like, and kind of just show them off to y'all. But don't worry, this is only the first part of the story. I haven't even touched the other two main characters, or the wild world of demons, reapers, and immortals, or the road trip arc. If you want to see those, do the subscribing and notification thing. I'll be here.
Waiting.
Or you could just keep my channel open on another tab and wait for them to appear. That works too, I guess. Anyways, I think that brings us to the end of this. I hope you enjoyed and have a fantastic spooky month.